Okay, good evening. Parshas Vayeira, 3 items that I'm looking forward to share with you this evening. 3 new wonderful ideas. The first one I saw in Rabbi Emanuel Bernstein's Sefer, phenomenal Sefer, and a really exceptional idea. Let's go through the opening psukim of the Parsha, and that will help us understand the question that is going to be raised. The Parsha begins with Avram Avinu recovering from bris milah at the end of last week's parsha. Vayeira elov Hashem be'eloinei mamrei v'yoshev pesach oil k'chom hayom. Familiar pasuk. Next pasuk. Vayiso eino vayar v'hinei shloisha anoshim nitzavim olov. He lifts up his eyes and he sees 3 men, what they appear to him as men. Vayomer shoivosh. Sorry, and then the malachim come, etc. And he gives them food. The hachnos sarchim of Avram Avinu. Then jumping to pasuk Yud. Vayomer, and they come and tell Sarah the good news. Shoiv oshuv eilecha ka'es chayo, v'hinei ven l'Sarah ishtecha. They tell Avram Avinu the good news that his wife Sarah, who's been barren all these years, 89 years, is going to have a child. The Sarah shemas pesach ha'ohel v'hu acharov, and she's actually listening from the Pesach of the Ohel. Pasuk Yud Aleph. V'Avram v'Sarah zakenim, they were very old. Boim bayomim chodalius l'Sarah erach kanoshim. Biologically she shouldn't have been able to have children. Pasuk Yud Beis v'titzchak Sarah bekirba. Sarah laughs bekirba, inside her. I guess that means, we'll see exactly what it means, but it means sort of not an outward expression of laughter, but an inner laughter. Leimer achrei beloisi haisla edna v'adoni zakein. At this stage in my life, my husband is so old, we're going to have children. He's 99 years old. Vayomer Hashem el Avraham lama zeh tzachka Sarah leima ha'afam nom eled v'ani zokanti. HaKadosh Baruch Hu then comes to Avram and says, why is she laughing? That's the familiar opening of this week's Sedra. A question which I encountered, which I haven't really thought of, and to my embarrassment. It's lovely when you come across questions which you think, Till now, the whole dialogue has been with the Malachim and Avram Avinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends these 3 Malachim, and the opening 10, 11 Psukim, the Malachim are communicating with Avram Avinu. On this final point, Lama zeh socha tzara, who's talking? Vayomer Hashem. Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to enter the conversation at this stage to rebuke Sarah? Why couldn't the Malachim say it? They were doing all the talking till now. The Malachim should have said to Avram, by the way, why is Sarah laughing? We're telling you good news. Why is she not believing in this? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to intervene? The Malachim were there. They were speaking till now. They could have happily said it. That's the question. So l'chaira, the answer is, Vatischak Sarah bekirba. She laughed inside. It wasn't an external laughter, which the Malachim would have noticed. And therefore, that's why they didn't notice. And that is sort of supported by the pasuk in Tehillim, Hashem yodea machshavos adam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows the thoughts of man, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu was able to ascertain that, and that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the one to rebuke and says, Vayomer Hashem el Avraham lama zeh tzachka katzara. Pseudo. The difficulty is this. There is a Tosfos in Shabbos, Daf Yud Beis, which suggests that Malachim do know a human being's thought. So then, if Malachim know a human being's thought, then the kasha reappears. Because if the Malachim know what the person is thinking, then they knew that Sarah was laughing. And again, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to intervene? The Malachim could have done so. They know. How do I know? How does Tosfos know? So Tosfos there in Shabbos is talking about, the Gemara is talking about Malochi Asharis, whether they understand Lashon Aramaic. It says Tosfos over there, the Gemara says, She'ein Malochi Asharis makirin belashon Arami. So the Gemara says Tosfos, V'tema, I don't understand that. Da'afilu machshava shebelev kol adam yodim, Malachim know the thoughts of man. V'lashon Arami ein yodim, and they won't know this particular dialect, they know people's thoughts. So if, according to Tosfos, Malachim knows a person's thought, then why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervene? And furthermore, a second question, how does Tosfos deal with the pasuk of Hashem Yodea Machshavos Adam? That suggests that only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows the thoughts of a man, and not Malachim. And yet Tosfos clearly is of the opinion, afilu machshava shebelev kol adam, malachim no. So two questions on this Tosfos. Number one, the question we started with, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervene? And question number two, how do they understand the pasuk Hashem Yodea Machshavos Adam? So, in order to answer this question, Rabbi Bernstein refers us to someone called Rav Moshe Chagiz. Rav Moshe Chagiz, there's a sefer Mishnas Chachamim, says something very, very interesting. When you have a thought, there's a process. There's a process until sort of you can formulate your thoughts. There's like an initial stage. Sometimes, there's something bothering you and you can't quite put your finger on it. You can't quite articulate it. It's sort of, reverberating in your brain, but you can't quite understand what's bothering you. And then it takes a while until you process it, you think about it, and then you can formulate your thoughts. You haven't even expressed it yet. So there's a process about how your thoughts are formulated. Take a look at the Mishnas Chachamim, the third box on the page. This can explain Tosfos Kasha. How can it be that they don't understand Aramis? They understand the thoughts of a person. Tema. Shafilu machshava shebelev adam yodim. Tosfos Kasha. Makshim. Shahashem hu yadeh machshavos adam ve'ech yomu shamalachim hem yodin. Furthermore, the pasuk says in Tehillim, Hashem yodeh machshavos adam. So how can you say that Malachim understands? Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands? Those are our two questions. Listen to this. Elo, second paragraph of the middle box, the bottom box. Elo sheyesh hefresh ben Hashem yisborach shehi yis'ale yodea hamachshava shi bekloyes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows our thoughts before we can even formulate those thoughts. Sha'adayin ein bo mamish, there's just nothing to them. They're so early that they haven't even been formulated in a person's mind. V'lefichach ksiv Hashem yodea machshavas adam ki heima hovel, because they are hovel. Rotzolomar oidom hevel. What does that mean? When they're still hevel. In other words, normally you understand the pasuk Hashem yodea machshavas adam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows man's thoughts. Ki heima hovel, the continuation of the pasuk, because heima hovel, they're hevel, we normally translate as vanity. So Hashem knows man's thoughts, for they are vanity, etc., etc. That's not pshat. Rather, the pasuk means Hashem knows man's thoughts. Hashem yodeh machshavos adam. Ki heima hovel. Ki doesn't mean for. Rashi says it in this week's Parsha. Ki has four lashonos. It means four different things. Here, ki does not mean because or for, but rather when. Ki heima hevel, when they are hevel. Hevel over here does not mean vanity, but it means like air, they're formless. I.e., HaKadosh Baruch Hu yodea machshavos adam ki heima hovel, when they are still formless, before you yourself have actually articulated the thought. Now, therefore, continues the Mishnas Chachamim, ava machshava hinosenes belev, hari zu ki'ilu yotza lechutz, u'lefichach yesh oim dehiru kedibra dami. But only when you formulated the thought and it's clear in your mind, then malachim are able to understand it. Even before it's been formulated, HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands it. In other words, there are stages to a thought process. Sarah laughed internally, but there was something troubling her about what the malachim was saying to Avram Avinu. She didn't yet articulate that thought. At that stage, only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows that. So therefore, it's only HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes along to Avram and says, Lama zeh tzachak hatzara, because the malachim are not yet able to understand that thought. And that is pshat, vatitzchak sara bekirba. It doesn't say vatitzchak sara beliba, which is the normal expression, because vatitzchak sara beliba would have meant she has a thought, which is a formulated thought, and she just doesn't express it yet. Doesn't say that. Because that the malachim would have understood. Vatitzchak sara bekirba means that it was completely inside her, and it never even rose to the level of a formulated thought. That's what it means. So interestingly, that is why, in answer to our question, even according to Tosfos, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to intervene. Because at that very early stage, the malachim were not able to understand Sarah's thoughts. And if you think about it, even Sarah herself had not formulated it. So she herself couldn't yet quite put her finger on it. It was so early on. So that's why, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you think about it, later it says, "V'tchachish Sarah lema lo tzachakti, ki yoreh vayomer lo ki tzachakta." We normally understand that to mean it's a rebuke. He's telling her off. You did laugh. Don't say you didn't. Now we're understanding it differently. She was unable to recognize that she had laughed as the feeling hadn't yet been formulated. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu was therefore not admonishing her, but informing her that actually, no, you were questioning me. You couldn't put your finger on it. This is an early stage thought process. No, ki tzachakta. He's not admonishing her, but he's informing her. So a very, very interesting insight of Rav Moshe Chagi's fascinating way of slightly looking slightly differently at this very familiar episode. In short, 2 questions. Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to enter the conversation at this stage to rebuke Sarah? The Malachim could have done it. And according to Tosfos, you want to tell me that the Malachim didn't understand what she was saying? Was this a thought? According to Tosfos, Malachim do understand. And further, so how does Tosfos deal with that? And second of all, so according to Tosfos, if Malachim understand, why did Hashem intervene? And second of all, how does he understand the pasuk Ki Hashem Yodeh Machshavas Adam, which implies Malachim don't? Teretz is Hashem Yodeh Machshavas Adam Ki Heima Havel, not for they are vanity, but when they are formless, when they're sort of air, when they're nothing, in the very, very early stages. And it was at that early stage that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was able to intervene before the Malachim were even able to understand it. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to intervene. And that's Pshat, Vatitzchak Tzar Bekirba, not Beliba. It was Bekirba. It was so inside her that it never even had yet risen to the level of a formulated thought. Okay. Beseder. Let's turn over. That's the next page. Now, the next thing is an astonishing thing. If you've never heard this before, this is quite remarkable. I'm reading. This is what I'm going to read from you now. Is an extract from the Hakdama of the 8th Chelek of Rav Moshe Feinstein's Igros Moshe. So this is a very reputable source. This is Rav Moshe Feinstein, right, who we've all know and heard of, who, of course, was born in Russia. He was the Rav in Luban before he came to America. And this incident happened in the winter of 1931, early 1932. And he writes about, in the Hakdama to this Sefer, they write about this story known in the Feinstein family. A remarkable episode regarding the daughters of Lot. Okay, take a look at paragraph, box number 2. But Luban. In Luban, this is the place in Russia where Moshe was a Rav before he came to America in the 1930s. Hayu Gedolei Torah Rabbim. There were many great Torah personalities. V'Rabbeinu, and our master, i.e. Moshe Feinstein, Hayu Mesaper, he would tell the following story, as Hamaisa Delalon, the following story, Kedei Laharash Hayu Mehem Shegiu Lemadregas Ruach HaKodesh Kimat. That there were some people who had pretty much achieved a level of Ruach HaKodesh, Shel Gilui Amitzi B'Torah, of real revelation of Torah. B'tchilas Choref Tofresh Pei Beis, in the beginning of the winter in 1931, into 1931, Chola Echod Mibale Habatim. One of the Balabatim became ill. V'nofel Mishkav, and he sort of was confined to bed. B'min Chayli Muzar, in a very strange illness. V'lashona hisnapcha b'fiv. His tongue was just very swollen. Kasher tokifle olma. People realized that his end was nearing. V'Rabbeinu bolavakre, and Rabbeinu Moshe Feinstein came to visit him. Bikesh hachayre lahitzi kolish me'olov. He asked for every single person in the room to leave, and only Rav Moshe would stay. V'sipela Rabbeinu es sibas cholya, and he explained the reason for his illness. L'dvarov shavua kaidim lachein, about a week before that, b'Shabbos Parshas Vayeira, this week's Sedra, Hikshe, this Balabayas asked the following question: Keitzad zochu b'nei Zlot? How could the daughters of Zlot, she'Moshiach yeh b'tzetzoehen, the Moshiach would come from them? Because we know that Lot lived with his 2 daughters. They thought the world had come to an end. He lived with his 2 daughters to perpetuate humanity. From one of the daughters, the eldest child was called Moav. From Moav comes Rus. Rus David HaMelech, and the whole Shalshel is down to Melech Mashiach. He asked the question, how could it be that Lot merited that Melech Mashiach would come from him? Even though was he not embarrassed with the Gilui Arayos that he did, living with his daughters? And he by calling the child Moav, it's well known that who the father of this child was. And this Balabayas spoke in a very disparaging way about the daughters of Lot and Lot. Belayla, that night, two old ladies came to this gentleman who was sick in a dream. Their heads and their faces were covered with some sort of scarf. And they said to this ill man that they were the daughters of Lot. And they added, they understand his complaint. How could it be that Moshiach is going to come from them? And they came from the Olam HaEmes to give a response. They claimed they could have explained their way out of this, and they could have said, listen, they come from the Mishpach of Avram Avinu, and they were saved in a miraculous way. They could have said that it wasn't the Maises Nus, we were saved in a miraculous way. They could have said that the whole thing happened through a miracle. We conceived sort of in a miraculous way. As it were, the Immaculate Conception, as it's known in other religions. That there was no man involved, that as it was, the whole thing was derech nes. Ramesh says it before. And perhaps this could have been a beginning of a new religion of Christianity. Vehein kor livneihem Ammon and Moav. They therefore bedafka called their children Ammon and Moav, which Moav is clearly and Ammon is intimates it. Lahidia to inform shekashe isha misaberes, when a woman becomes pregnant, yesh levlad tomid av bosov adam. There has to be a biological human father. Bizchus why? Because they wanted to avoid the possibility of a storyline that other religions use. Bizchus in the merit of that, they sort of put aside their own shame to make sure that people wouldn't get the wrong end of the stick, to think that there's such a concept of a miraculous, immaculate conception, or whatever you want to call it. That's how they merited to have Moshiach. They said it was a great sin. What this man spoke about them was considered a very grave sin, because after all, they were doing this l'shem shamayim. Because he spoke in a degrading, disparaging way. And therefore this man has to be punished, like the Meraglim who spoke ill of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore their tongues sort of were elongated. Well, so too, this gentleman, his tongue became swollen in a very weird, strange way. And that's how he died. And that's how he will die. When this man finished telling Moshe the story, he turned to the wall, and he passed away. Rabbeinu Moshe Feinstein felt that this was true. He thought it was an honest, true explanation, and this is what he would tell his family. So an astonishing anecdote, a story, brought in Igros Moshe, which is a classic Shailas and Shuvas of Moshe Feinstein in the beginning of Chelek Ches. Written by the family of Ramesha, not by Ramesha himself, but this is a legend well known in the family of a story that happened to Ramesha in his early years in the Rabbonis in 1931-32 in Luban. An astonishing connection to this week's Parsha. Okay, let's finish off with one final idea. Vashem pokades Sarah. So at the end of the Parsha, Kadosh Baruch Hu remembers Sarah, and she merits to have a child, to have Yitzchak. Says Rashi, famous Rashi, Somach Parsha Zulakan, the connection between the previous Parsha, i.e. that Sarah was taken for a second time now, Shekol HaMevakesh Rachim Al Chaveiroi, that anyone who davens for a person, v'hu tzarich la'isa daven, he needs the same thing. Hu ne'ene b'tchila, he is answered first. Shenemar vayispalel v'samech lev Hashem pokad esora kodim Shiur pes Avimelech. A famous Gemara that Avram Avinu davened for Avimelech because he was stricken after he captured Sarah, and let's say he became totally clogged up, all his orifices were blocked, and therefore Avram Avinu davened for Avimelech, and therefore he was healed. But because, as it were, Sarah needed the same thing, she needed some sort of tefillah in order that she would be able to give birth. Hashem pakad Sarah, that kodim Shiur pes Avimelech, and therefore Chazal in Baba Kama says, "Kol mevakesh rachmim al chaveira v'hu tzarich lo yisodov." Anyone who davens for somebody else and they need the same thing, they're going to be answered first. That's the famous Gemara in Baba Kama, which Rashi is quoting. Now, two interesting haras. Hara number one: what if? So this could be a very useful technique, and it is in fact a good technique, and there are now sort of initiatives to sort of promote this. That's A davens for B, and B davens for A, etc. And that way they both need the same thing, they're davening for each other, and hunen etchila. What if, let's say you know that another person has a certain, you need a certain Yeshua. Yeah, whatever it may be. Parnasa is difficult for you, and you know another person who's struggling with Parnasa, so you daven for that other person. And then you're going to be answered first. That's what this Gemara means. Kol mevakesh rachem al chaveru, hu tzarich lo yisodov, hunen etchila. You'll be answered first. Or whatever the issue may be. What if you are davening for that other person, but you're only doing it so that you can be answered? How altruistic does it have to be? So this question was put to Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, and he said a very interesting answer. Based on the Maharal, he gave the following answer. What is the lomdus of this? How does it work? Generally speaking, when you daven, there needs to be, when you daven HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a certain thing, there needs to be a sort of a conduit, a tzinor, a pipeline coming down from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to you, and that really, the tefillah, is that pipeline. That's what connects you to the Rebbeinu Shalom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sort of showers you with that bracha. It's through the koach of tefillah that creates the pipeline, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through the tzinoros, through these pipelines, he sends down the answer, the Yeshua, the Rachmim, whatever that you need. If you're davening for somebody else, you become that pipeline. If you're the pipeline, then you, the whole bracha is going to come through you. So Rabbi Zilberstein gives a mashal. This explains it better. Imagine I want to take my hose with this weather. It's a sort of thing, it's a funny thing to do. But you want to water a dry garden. So you take a hose pipe and you start watering the garden. Now, when you turn the water on from the tap, the water goes through the pipe. Before the water even hits the grass or the flowers, the pipe itself is going to become wet because the water is going through it. If I'm davening for another person, I am the pipeline. So therefore, I'm going to become wet, as it were, with the water that is being showered through before it even hits the other person. That's the lomdus of it. Says Rabbi Zilberstein, it's just a reality. If you're davening for another person, you become the conduit, and therefore the bracha is passing through you. You will be the beneficiary of that, even if it's not altruistic. That's point number one. Point number two, very interesting question. Avraham and Sarah had already been promised a child. In last week's Sedra, we're told, in this week's Sedra, that this time next year, Sarah would have a child. So you see that she's already been promised a child. So what do you mean? Because I davened for Avimelech, therefore Sarah was going to be remembered? But the Malachim had already promised it. So even if he wouldn't have davened for Avimelech, the Malachim had promised it was going to happen. So what does it mean? Says the Maharal. This is the Maharal, not in Gur Aryeh on the Chumash, but the Maharal in Chidushei HaGodos in Baba Kama, on the source of the Rashi above, in Tzadi Beis Amud Aleph, the last box on the page. This is not a problem. Shahari Yaakov Omar. Listen to this. Kotointi mikol hachasodim or mikol ha'emes. Yaakov Avinu says, I feel small because of all the chesed that you do for me, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shahayu Yorei, because he was worried. Shema nismatu zuchuyosov b'shvil hachasodim. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu does a miracle for you, then the problem is that your account in Shemayim can be depleted because of that miracle that happened. B'shvil hachasodim she'os HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'Avraham, kashe'os l'HaKadosh Baruch Hu neis, sheharag melachim, when he killed the 4 kings, maybe all my schar in Olam Haba has been depleted because of this miracle that has been given to me. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to reassure Avram Avinu, don't worry, schorcha har b'moed. And had he not davened for Avimelech, that he would give him a son, it would have been taken from his heavenly account. But now that he davened, in other words, if he wouldn't have davened, then the brach of having a child would have depleted his heavenly account. That's what happens. But if you daven for something, then it's given to you as a gift, and it does not diminish in any way the schar you'll get in Olam Haba. And therefore, you're right, Avram Avinu and Sarah have been promised they were going to have a child. But had he not davened, that would have diminished from their schar in Olam Haba. Now that he davens, then it doesn't diminish. Now that is a tremendous yisoid, because we all need Yeshuas in all different areas. So if you don't daven, then you can get the Yeshuas, but it's coming at a price. If you daven for whatever it is, even when a person is well, you're davening for good health. Even a person has panos, you're davening for panosa, and you'll say, it won't come out a heavenly cheshbon. That's the power of tefillah. But if a person doesn't daven, you may get the thing, but it comes at a price. That's why Avram Avinu, that's why it was so important over here. Because had he not davened for Avimelech, then the problem would have been that it would have come, you would have got it, but it would have been diminished your heavenly reward. The fact that he davened, says the Maharal, it became like a free gift, and it didn't take away anything from the schar and the Olam Haba. Very interesting Maharal. So there we have it, 3 ideas. The first idea that we've described, that with Vatischak Torah Bekirba, the Kasha on Tosfos, that phenomenal idea of Moshe Chagiz explaining the whole episode at the beginning of the Parsha in a very interesting, a very different way. And then we have that remarkable story with the Moshe Feinstein and the daughters of light, how they came to him, and how this gentleman had a difficult end because he was mezalzel, he spoke disparagingly against the daughters of light. And then finally, Vashem Pokad Esora, this famous principle, A, what if he's not altruistic? He'll still get it. And B, why Avram and Sarah would have been promised, so they was going to come anyway. Says the Maharal, yes, but it would have come at a price. The fact that they daven means that it's going to come as a free gift, and it won't diminish the schar that they're going to get in Olam Haba. Okay, we'll leave it there.